Welcome back, everyone. We know that you are all very excited to hear from our distinguished guest and our very first invited speaker for the launching of our reading festival. Please allow us to introduce our moderators for today's session on celebrating the joy of reading with Her Excellency Isobel Abulhoul. First, we have Dr. Muna Al-Jnahi, Assistant Dean for Student Affairs. Dr. Muna is an assistant professor at the Curriculum and Instruction Department, specializing in language and literacy education. Her publications and research interests include literacy education, pop culture, language learning, and language arts. She has been shopping from Magrudy's since she was a child, and she has also been following the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature practically from its inception. Next, we have Dr. Mayra Garces-Baksal, Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies, and is an Associate Professor with the Special Education Department. Dr. Mayra served as a chair of the Program Committee for the Asian Festival Children Content in Singapore from 2011 to 2019, and she has edited 5 books on rediscovering children's literature in Asia, with a focus on the Philippines, Malaysia, India, China, and Japan. As part of the proceedings of the AFCC, where she continues to serve as international advisor at large. Thank you so much, Dr. Muna and Dr. Mayra. Here you go.
Thank you, Iman. Okay, so Dr. Mana will now introduce our distinguished guest. Dr. Mana.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to read Her Excellency's bio. So apart from serving as the CEO and trustee of Emirates Literature Foundation, founder of Magrudy's, as you know, this is my favorite bookstore, and the internationally renowned Emirates Airline Festival of Literature, Her Excellency Isobel Abulhoul is also an officer of the Order of the British Empire and was named Cultural Personality of the Year by His Highness Dr. Sheikh Sultan bin Mohammed Al Qasimi, the ruler of Sharjah, and is also an award recipient from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum for her contribution to the Year of Reading in the UAE. Isobel is also the founder of Al-Ittihad Private School in 1975, and she began a new reading and teaching scheme in Arabic called Bistan al-Qisas, which empowered teachers to write and use their own stories. Over to you, Dr. Mayra.
So ever since we've had the opportunity to meet Her Excellency Isobel Abulhoul, when she had the conversation with His Excellency, the Chancellor Zaki Anwar Nusaybeh, where we managed to be part of that meeting and meet her, we know that she is the perfect person to launch our reading festival, which celebrates the joy of reading and teachers and leaders as lifelong readers. Apart from the extensive bio that Dr. Mana has just read, Isobel is also an infant care teacher, if I remember, from everything that we have been reading about you. So without further ado, Isobel, I now leave it to you to talk about Reading for Pleasure, which is your 5-year initiative. Yes.
Thank you so much, ladies, for such a lovely introduction. And thank you, all of you who are here today. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I have a new grandchild. It's my 8th grandchild. So I'm here sharing those very important first early days with them. I'm back in the UAE next week. So Reading for Pleasure has been a mission for me all my adult life. And why is it so important? Because for me, children who have the opportunity to grow up in a house that has books, whose parents read and who value reading, who read to their children on a daily basis, have a lifelong advantage over children who grow up in a house without books, whose parents don't read. So it's something that I've been witnessing and researching for more than 50 years, thinking, how can we help change this cycle and introduce reading for pleasure, both at home and in schools? So the Reading for Pleasure initiative has been born out of this desire. We are most fortunate to have a partnership with DP World for this 5-year initiative. And it came out of a global council focused on the SDG goals. And one of those is quality education and reduced inequalities and partnership. So we are delighted to have a partnership with the UAE University as well, in terms of providing independent expert research on this 5-year project and what impact it will have on those students. So the pilot scheme is looking at 6 schools. We will have 4 specialists who 2 who are bilingual, so they're native speakers of Arabic, 2 who are English, who've all got a background in teaching, who will be visiting these schools and making very close relationships with the teachers and also with the parents and the students. The idea is that over the 5 years, we will have an opportunity to really embed reading for pleasure. So reading for pleasure is where children are exposed and appreciate how enjoyable books can be, how enjoyable stories can be. We all love stories, but what happens often is that when we go to school, we have to learn how to read. It's like learning to ride a bike or learning to drive a car. You have to learn the mechanics, and that is not the enjoyable bit. The enjoyable bit is when you can read and you forget you're actually doing it and you get caught up in the story. So we have to have the way that children know that it's worth learning to read, because then they can enjoy reading. So we will ensure that in the schools we work with, we enrich their school libraries. We put in classroom libraries so children have an opportunity at any time during the day when they've finished whatever work the teacher may have set them, to go and sit in the little library corner in their classroom and pull off any book. The other thing that we will try and work with the leadership of each school is to ensure that on the timetable every week, every student in the school visits the library, and those children are all able to borrow 2 books, one in Arabic, one in English, and they can choose whichever books they like from within the library. We will ensure that all the books within each library are culturally appropriate and provide both a mirror and a window. So it's really important that children see themselves in books. It's you know, it's very sad if all the books you see never feature a female, never feature someone who has dark hair, someone who has fair hair, someone who wears glasses. So it's really important that children have diverse books where they can see themselves as a hero or heroine. Also, the window it gives them an opportunity to see the world around them as well, whether it's non-fiction books about animals, about space, about flight, about the sea. They need to have that choice as well. So 1 time a week, all children will visit the library and be able to borrow books and take them home. This also takes reading home into the home, and they can share the books with their siblings and their parents. They also learn to take care of books, to think that books need to be looked after because they have to bring them back to school the next week. We will also request that each classroom or home teacher reads a story at the end of every school day for the children. And that means that whether you can read or not, whether you're a good reader or not, you can enjoy someone else reading the story to you. And scientifically, what happens to us when we read or are read to? 2 things can be measured scientifically. Our heart rate drops and our blood pressure drops. So it's telling us that we relax. And this, again, is one of the key benefits of reading. It is a very good way of helping you relax. We will offer professional development for all the teachers in these 6 schools that will be certified. So they will get professional development. And over the sort of first year, we will be exploring what topics are going to really help. which areas should we focus on? And then over the 5 years, the teachers will be able to develop their professional skills and add to their skills that will help them become even better teachers than they are already. We will also hold regular meetings for parents, so they're involved in all the different initiatives that are happening with this. So we form that triangle of students, parents, and teachers together, where we are all together and joined on the aim of bringing joy into the classroom, joy into reading. We will have regular author visits, which bring a bit of excitement and different things, and also look at the opportunities for cross-curricular activities, whether it's drama, it's painting, it's drawing, whether it's science or whether it's history, because stories cover all of these things. So we don't want reading to be just reading. We want it to stretch across the curriculum. So that is, in a nutshell, a lot about reading for pleasure. But why? Why do I believe, and why does the 40+ years of global research show that reading for pleasure is important? Because those children who read regularly for pleasure will outperform their peers if everything else is equal. So regardless of intelligence, regardless of income at home, regardless of the facilities that the child has, if a child reads regularly for pleasure, they do better in exams, they have more confidence, they have a much wider vocabulary, they also develop critical thinking faculties, and they generally have better mental health because they can relate to issues. When you read books as a child, they're stories often about other children who go through adversity. And you look at the success of the Harry Potter series, okay? I think it's now 500 million copies of the Harry Potter series have been sold and read. So why was it so successful? Because Harry Potter was an orphan. He was a child that had very difficult circumstances at home, and then he went off to this amazing place and found he had special skills. Well, children can identify with that. So no matter how sad they feel at times, knowing that someone else is much worse off than you and has not just been told off for being naughty or things like that, but has a much worse life, helps us deal with the everyday challenges, because life often is not fair, and reading can be very helpful on that. So we're giving our children all these advantages, along with empathy, along with a knowledge of the world around them, and abilities to cope with things. So, you know, who wouldn't want that for the next generation? I think that is really, in a nutshell, why I believe it's so important. We want to give every child in education the best possible chance of success. And I believe reading for pleasure is a key part of that. So delighted to be joining you virtually today, and I look forward to the questions from the wonderful hosts today on the stage.
Wonderful. So thank you, Isobel. Can we give Isobel a huge round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll probably begin, Dr. Mona. I'm not sure if you're able to see us. Yep, I think Isobel is. I brought with me today we've done our research. We've looked up everything about you that we can find online. And we found out that your absolute favorite when you were a child is Heidi by Johanna Spyri and Frances Hodgson Burnett's The Secret Garden. So yes. I was able to scrounge my bookshelves and find exactly
You've done your research very well. Absolutely.
That spoke to you as a child. Now my question is, if you were to recommend a mirrors and windows kind of children's book written by someone from the UAE, what children's book would you now recommend to the younger generation? You have a new grandchild. So what picture book would you most likely read that would show, you know, something from the UAE?
So if it was a little girl, the ELF Publishing, we started a very small publishing company a couple of years ago out of the foundation, and we've published a beautiful book called Aisha's Pearl. And so we've looked at the history of pearl diving, and Aisha very much would like to be a pearl diver, and she speaks to her grandfather. He tells her all about how life was and how hard. And I think this is a beautiful book because, you know, every girl should be able to dream, and they shouldn't be told, no, 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 that's not for you. So I think that would be a great book. And when I look at my two favorite books, The Secret Garden, I absolutely loved it because the little girl was an orphan. She was born in India. Her parents were there, and there was a cholera outbreak. So she traveled by sea. Once they passed away, she had no one to stay with an uncle on the forbidding Yorkshire moors, which is a very cold, grey place if you've grown up in India. And she was a spoilt, unlovable child. But over the course of the book, she turned into a heroine. And I just absolutely loved how the writer brought that to life and how they included animals, you know, because often we have, as human beings, we have such a relationship with animals, be it cats or dogs or horses, wild creatures, how they can't speak, but we communicate with them. So I absolutely love that. And Heidi, I'd never been to Switzerland as a child. I don't think I'd traveled out of UK until I was a teenager, but I could imagine what it was like to be Heidi living up in the Swiss Alps and with the goat herd milking the goats and her grandfather. It was so vivid for me. It was more vivid than anything I was ever going to see in a film or on television. So I think they gave me a mirror on the world, but also I traveled with them on their journey to become heroines. And the two books I loved had female heroines. I think that says a lot of things as well about how important it is to you know, to be able to see yourself and think, well, could that be me?
And it's perfect as well for March, since it is Women's Month as well. Dr. Mana? There you go.
Thank you very much, Isobel. I'll have to say I'm one of those lucky ones who lived like 5 minutes away from Magrudy's. So Magrudy's bring back so many nostalgic memories for me. Every weekend, my father would take us. First of all, he would buy books for himself, and then we would buy other books for ourselves as well. And so I remember the Sleepover Club was one of my favorite growing up, one of my favorite series. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Magrudy's because it was launched in 1975. Back then, what were some of the fan favorites that people enjoyed reading?
It was back then, it was way before the internet. When it was first started, I typed letters, sent them by post, by airmail, and waited for catalogues to come. It was a very long process. So it was impossible to, for example, stock bestsellers. So we were very reliant on classics, you know, books that I knew that children would love, because we started off really as a toy shop with books, with children's books. But, you know, then families would come in and say, well, we want mother and baby books, we want cookbooks, we want fiction books, we want memoirs, biographies. So books grew and grew and grew, which was wonderful because that's where I still love toys. I think toys are also very important in terms of children's, you know, education and their earliest sort of exploring the world around them. But books were the sort of thing that really captured my imagination from a very early age. So what were the early things? So we had all of the Roald Dahl books that some had just been published and they were continued to be published and were very popular. There was lots of there was a book about chipmunks. So it was by Russell Hoban, and there were these little, I think it was Harriet, there was a little chipmunk. A lot were animal books. There was Flicker. Flicker was a horse series, Black Beauty. Little House on the Prairie, some of the American classics as well. So we just really had a sort of a wide range. And in those days, in the first early days, we didn't stock Arabic books, but we soon explored how we could import Arabic books and what was being published as well in the Emirates. So it was wonderful to be at the beginning of that journey when things were really starting to happen in the Emirates, and books were starting to be published, writers were getting their books published. So it was just a wonderful time. I can't think back to, it was really a lot of, it was the classics of the time. And then when we would go back to the UK to visit my family in Cambridge, I would scour the, Cambridge had an amazing bookshop, or bookshops, the Heffer's Bookshop, which was a Cambridge institution as far as students in the university. And they had a children's bookshop, a separate children's bookshop in those days. It's no longer there now. And that would be a wonderful place for me to explore when we were back there, and sort of buy lots of books, and then I could get in touch with the publishers and order those as well.
We truly admire your vision in terms of just combining your initial idea of establishing an educational toy shop with a bookshop. Based on what we've read, it's during that time, things were very compartmentalized, as you've noted, but you did it the way that you envisioned it to be. And now it's the longest running bookstore here in the UAE. So congratulations really for that. My question now has to do with the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. This is my first year attending the festival, and I'm just blown away by the speakers, by the authors, the poets. My favorite would have to be the desert, that experience of just listening to poets read aloud their poetry right there in the desert. So from a ladies' luncheon to a literary festival, I know that it initially started, the idea was sparked by that ladies' literary luncheon and your connection with the Foyles bookstore owners as well. Could you run us through the very first ever festival in, I think in 2009, right? Who were your first guests? How did you manage to convince them to come here to the UAE? I'm sure most of them are not familiar with the UAE. Who were among your first guests? What were the birthing pains of that first ever launching of the literary festival?
It was actually not as difficult as you would think, because I think because I had the background of being a bookseller, I knew I had all the connections to publishers, and that had been established for some time. And I'd started to have, when authors were passing by, I would do sort of little talks with the authors in the bookshop and have a signing afterwards. And so I'd sort of experimented a little bit in it. And then so I thought, right, who would we really, you know, want to have come to the literary festival? So in that first year, we had the late Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes. His memoir was a book that had touched me deeply. I just thought it was the most amazing book. And he was every bit as wonderful in person as he was as a writer. So it was amazing to have him there. We had Terry Brooks, the fantasy writer. We had Anthony Horowitz. We had so many famous authors. And I think they were intrigued that they hadn't ever been to the Middle East. They hadn't ever been to the Arab world. They hadn't been to the UAE. And so for them, it was like a bit of an adventure, and it was a bit of an adventure for all of us. And luckily, it went extremely well. We had 65 authors in that first year, and it was, we knew that we could do it, and that we tried our absolute best to make sure that everyone had a wonderful time. From the very first festival, we had an education day, which did not happen at literary festivals. We also had a very strong children's program, which fitted in very much with our you know, sort of vision to help as many people fall in love with books as possible. So the letter that I wrote to authors via the publishers would say that unlike other literary festivals in the world, our target audience is not readers, because we know that they will come in droves. Our target audiences are those people, particularly young ones, who have not yet fallen in love with books and reading, because we have had huge success with young people coming to the festival, thousands and thousands on school visits or coming with families, and they suddenly discover actually they quite like that book and they want to read more. So it's that connection that sometimes it's just one book that can turn you from a non-reader into someone who loves reading. So it was a fantastic experience. And so we had the Education Day, and on Education Day, we sent out most of the authors from the 65, sent them out to schools and universities across the UAE. And they were they'd never done, because festivals didn't do school visits or university visits. And they said, well, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? I was standing with them in the foyer where we held the festival of the Intercontinental in Festival City. They said, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do? And so they went up. But when they came back, it was like they were transformed. They said, we met such a diverse audience. They asked incredible questions. They were so knowledgeable about our books, etc. So they all had a wonderful time. And I knew then that, again, that including Education Day and educational visits was a really key pillar to the festival, and has continued to go from strength to strength over the years.
I'm glad that you also mentioned that you're targeting the non-readers, or those who do not think of themselves as readers yet, because it's essentially just preaching to the converted, if you will. If you have just a group of fellow bibliophiles. But I'm happy that there's also very active chat responses as to how the festival has transformed, the experiences of many here in the UAE.
So, Isobel, as part of your bio, and as we were reading a little bit about your initiatives and many, many wonderful projects, one that really struck me was the Bustan al-Qasas, which was particularly made for teachers so that it could encourage them to publish stories for their students. And it resonates with what we're doing in our reading festival here as well, because we're from the College of Education and we want to encourage our students to become authors and to publish. So how was that experience, and were there any successful publications after the initiative?
So it was an amazing, amazing project. So it was born out of the idea that many of the ways of teaching reading in Arabic were imported. Okay, so they were imported, they were from other parts of the world, or they were translated, and it just felt they were not a mirror. These books were not a mirror for the children or the teachers, and felt that actually empowering teachers, listening to teachers, what works for them is vitally important. So it was grown out of this sort of idea. And so we had a group of Arabic teachers from both government and private schools. I think there was about 15 in total who were allowed a day release from once a week from their schools to come along and be part of this group, who then got together to talk about teaching reading, and then talking about their own stories. We had 2 linguists who were teachers as well, but it was about language acquisition and reading. That was their speciality. And so they worked very closely over 3 years with this group. And then the teachers started to write their own stories. They were illustrated. Some were illustrated from within the group. Some we outsourced to be illustrated. And there were a series of graded readers for KG1, KG2, and Grade 1. And we also had these wonderful sort of sheets for teachers, laminated sheets, where they could use the books to integrate across the curriculum. So there was all these different things. And this was quite some time ago. It must have been in 2005 or something like that. It was quite some time ago. And then sadly, we had a very kind funder for this, but then the funding stopped and we were unable to continue. And I do think that the College of Education in the UAE University, it would be a fantastic thing for you to sort of take on. Happy to share the whole series with you of the work that was done, and maybe you can initiate it again. We also published books working with the High Colleges of Technology, written by Emirati students there. We launched 13 one year, I think 9 another year. And again, it's wonderful to give. And a lot of these it was, I think, from the Faculty of Education, and then they joined forces with the Faculty of Communications and together worked on these wonderful books. One was shortlisted for the Sharjah Prize. It was about a camel called With the Smallest Hump. So it was a beautiful, very appropriate book for this part of the world.
Perfect. And we're really, really looking forward to hearing more about that. In fact, in the reading challenge that we launched for our reading festival, we have participants coming from IT, coming from the College of Medicine, coming from veterinary and agriculture as well. So it's really like all over, from science and so forth. So we're very pleased about that. When you moved here in 1968, that's correct, right? Around 1968, I recall that the book Arabian Sands was the book that sort of grounded you in terms of what to expect in the UAE.
Yes, yes, it was.
What would be the Arabian Sands that you would recommend now, written by a contemporary author based here in the UAE, to someone who has never been to the UAE, to introduce them to the culture, to its people? What would be that Arabian Sands for someone else?
So I think I would still recommend Arabian Sands. I think you can learn so much about a culture by looking back at its history. You know, the same cultural influences that were there, the hospitality, the way of life is still very embedded in Arabian culture, in Emirati culture, the sharing of food, the treating of a guest. I think all of those things are absolutely key. And I think reading Arabian Sands, you could also read A Mother Without a Mask, that was another beautiful book that just helps you have more insight. There's also a wonderful book by Rauda Al-Murray, which is, she co-wrote with one of her neighbors just to sort of help dispel myths about Emiratis. I can't remember the name of it. Is it 101? I can't quite, but it's Rauda Al-Murray who wrote it, an Emirati writer. And it's a really interesting key facts, just because some of her sort of neighbors were non-Emiratis and, you know, had so many questions. So this is like a Q&A book of things that you would like to know, but you feel maybe slightly shy about asking.
Perfect. Can I ask another question? Yep. So yesterday we had the pleasure of attending the Global Forum in Innovation and Education in Dubai, organized by the Hamdan Foundation. And our college dean, Dr. Hala El-Hawaris, was actually a moderator for the global mentoring panel. So in that global mentoring panel, they had like mentees and mentors coming from all over the world, but the emphasis was mostly on STEM, actually exclusively on STEM. And the question asked by Dr. Hala was, why just on STEM, and why not include, you know, global mentoring for talent in other areas like the literary arts, for example? And I think the answer given was that it makes more sense to look into the math and sciences if the world is ill, or if the world has issues or has problems, and so forth. So we listened to that response, but I would now want to ask you, because in our view, it's not really one or the other. It really has to be both. So our question is, what do you think is the role of authors, poets, artists in a world that is ill or in a world that is sick?
I think that we need well-rounded human beings. Language is one of the key defining attributes of humanity, that we have language. And we have the ability, and we have developed that ability over millennia, to be able to record our thoughts, our learnings, and share them in written languages. And that those learnings have been passed down through generations. So some of the greatest medical scientists have come from Arabia. First language was here. The first written law was in Iraq. So the most amazing library of the world was in Alexandria. We have a long history in this part of the world of a cherishing and a value of the word, the written word. And if we ignore that, we are the poorer. So without language, how can one be a doctor? How can one be a scientist? How can one be an astronaut without the ability to read and write and understand? So how do we develop critical thinking if we don't read? And to be a scientist, to be a research person, you need to be a disruptor. How can you be a disruptor without you have a keen sense of how to disrupt? How can you debate? How can you become a politician if you do not have the language skills to do so? And where do those language skills come from? So I have yet to meet a writer who's not a reader. It's very difficult to be a good writer if you have not exposed yourselves to hundreds and hundreds of books. That's where you feed your mind and your soul. So how could you leave out the ability to read and the wish to read? And you only have to go back not very long to see all the great doctors, scientists, researchers, Nobel winners. They were not just physicists and chemists, and they were well-rounded people who, language and reading were key to their beings.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We before we open it up to the audience for Q&A, I think you pointed out something very poignant in terms of all writers need to become readers first. And oftentimes what happens is that readers, it's a natural transition to become writers. And we are avidly looking forward to reading your own memoir or maybe biography in the future. We read somewhere that you read for like 3 hours a day. I'm not sure if this is still accurate. How do you manage to read for like 3 hours a day?
I tend to wake up very early, and if I wake up, I can't waste it. So I always have a pile of books and I'll start reading. I spend a lot of time reading books to my grandchildren, and I count that within the 3 hours. I love children's books. I think children's writers are some of the cleverest writers in the world, how they can manage to do what they do. It just fascinates me how words can be so powerful. I think it's the power of words that I'm always entranced by. How can words, how can it make us, how could it touch our emotions in such ways that we can cry and laugh just by these little black squiggles on a page? The pictures that they paint in our imagination, and the joy it is for a child when they discover that, words really do matter. And then once you've discovered that in a book, you know how powerful words are, and you can start to use them yourself to put across an argument. So if we think about an argument, one of the key things we have to learn is how to agree to disagree respectfully. So when we disagree with someone, we don't criticize them as a person, and we don't even criticize their ideas. What we say is, I have a different opinion, please can I share that with you? And that again is coming out of being a reader, that you start to learn how you can use language to do that with respect. And I think that's a really important skill. If we had more orators, then let's hope there'd be less wars.
Isobel, as someone who's very highly invested in the field of education and in, reading and in literacy education, what are some titles that you think need to be in school libraries and in the classroom?
I think that the most important thing, it's not just one or two books, because what used to fascinate me, and you may remember that from your thing, how every child would come in to Magrudy's and would like a different book. And that's, I think, the joy of books is there are so many different books out there and so many different tastes, whether it's fantasy, fiction, pony stories, the Goosebumps series, all these different series that children absolutely love. I think that choice is so important. And I found for boys particularly, because I've got 6 grandsons and 2 granddaughters, that they really enjoy non-fiction. They like books about trains, space, dinosaurs, the sea, machinery. They were things that I personally would never pick up. And I have read, I know the back of a steam engine inside out now from having read the same book so many times. Dinosaurs with their hundreds of names that, a 4-year-old grandson can tell me this one is this, and he knows how to say the words. So choice is absolutely key, that children have choice. So taking children to a bookshop, taking children to a library, having a visit to the library every week where children are free to choose which books they like. And they may pull off a book that maybe is the wrong age group for them, but they soon find they start to develop, again, a taste. So we all tend to buy books by the cover or from a series. Children love series. So if there is a series and you've read one, you know what to expect with the second and the third and the fourth, etc. And again, that's great comfort for a child to know the kind of story that it's going to be and that they're going to enjoy it. But we also need to encourage them sometimes to step outside that comfort zone and try something else. And that's where book clubs at schools are very good, where we have at the festival, we have the Chevron Readers' Cup, where we select the books for the teams from each school who sign up, and they have to read those books. And again, a lot of the students over the years have said to us, we're so glad that we were part of this, because we've read books that we may never have chosen to read. And, it's developed our taste, and we now will read other books by that author. So it's good to explore. It's good to read things you're familiar with, but it's also good to explore. And I think that for children, the key word is choice, letting them choose, letting them develop their tastes, and letting them have an opportunity. So when my children were little, every night they would choose the books they wanted me to read. And so they would choose, and then I would choose a book. So we all had a choice. And then that meant we'd read 4 or 5 books. It was fine. But we all got the book we wanted to read. And we also listened to the books that the other ones wanted me to read. So again, it's finding those compromises. The teacher reading a story at the end of every school day is a really good thing, because the teacher will also increase their knowledge of children's books by reading. They will choose books that they enjoy themselves. They will choose books where they can put on different voices, and they learn how to to read aloud, which is not, we can't take that for granted that everyone can read aloud well. And also for the children, once they get to say 7 or 8 and you're reading chapter books, they're so excited for you to read the next chapter the next day. And you don't stop reading to children just because they can read. You continue to share books with them and stories, because there's a great joy in that. There's a great joy and there's a great memory that they will remember long after they've grown up. You reading a story with them together, that shared time is so important. And it's a wonderful way to end a school day, and it's a wonderful way for children to end and go to sleep on that very relaxing note.
We agree, absolutely, because we are lovers of picture books as well. We feel that it's really just like having an entire museum in one's hands, with all the magnificent art of, you know, outstanding illustrators. I've also picked up on something that you said about creatures, because that will be our theme next week when we invite Sean Tan, who is the creator of Creatures himself. So he will be joining us virtually, but we will be holding it as a hybrid event at the Mohammed bin Rashid Library. He has also given us permission to view his film, The Lost Thing, which is, again, very exciting, which won the Oscars, as you know. So I think now is the time to engage our audience. If there are questions that you have that you would like to ask Isobel, our host, Iman, would bring the microphone over to you. Any questions?
I actually, while we're waiting for that, I met Sean Tan in Melbourne, Australia in 2009. I was invited to the festival there after our festival, and he is incredible, absolutely incredible.
Just an amazing human being, really. In fact,
he really is.
Yeah, our festival program book cover is from his art, from his latest book, Creature.
Yes. But his books are so deep, and you can take them from so many different levels. So I think that's absolutely incredible. You've got him, and I look forward to tuning in on that. Is it at the Mohammed bin Rashid Library?
Yes, yes. We're very excited about that. Yes. Question, Dr. Najm, please.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I believe that it's like you give a thorough and a very it's like an excellent it's like journey on reading and the joy of reading. One of the things that caught my attention is it's like is how to instill the habits of literacy in general and habits of reading, because one of the things that it's like I'm impressed by is the idea of a writer who said that it's like reading is an infectious disease. It is caught and not taught. How it's like to build a culture of reading and instill habits of it's like literacy in general, with this long journey of yours and your observation on the culture.
Such a good question. Such a good question. Thank you so much for that question. What I would say is, I look at my own experience about why I am totally, utterly addicted to reading and books, is because the journey for me started at my earliest days as a child. I was fortunate that I grew up in a home where we had books. We had regular visits to the libraries. Both my parents were avid readers, and it was pre-internet age, so it was probably easier than it is today. But so bedtime stories were such a part of my childhood. I have such vivid memories, and particularly my father reading to me. So he got home from work about 5:45, and our bedtime was 6 o'clock. And I used to sit by the front door waiting for my father to come home, because I thought he may forget that he had to read me a story. And of course he never did, but it was that anticipation and excitement that I had that he would read a story to me every night. And so I think it is caught, not taught. And the sooner that parents understand their part in this equation or this triangle. So I think for many parents across the world, they think, well, reading happens at school. You know, when they get to school, someone will teach them to read, and they don't consider the importance of it. But actually, reading starts at home. It should start at home. As I said, children who are read to will have a much better vocabulary, much better language skills, much better when they start school in all subjects. You know, a lot of words, mathematical words, over, under, above, behind, are actually, if a child hasn't got that vocabulary, their mathematical concepts are missing something. So I think parents have to understand their responsibility, and they have to read themselves. This is going to be part of our Reading for Pleasure initiative, is the engagement with parents and involving them in this, because without them, then we are not going to succeed half as well. Also, if we can break the cycle and introduce and you know, let parents know how important their part in this is, in actually reading to their children, letting their children visit libraries, choose books, you know, finding time, putting away mobile devices, putting away iPads, etc., and focusing together on a book, you know, and just spending that time together is so, so important. There is nothing like it. So, you know, the gift to me from my parents was the gift of loving reading and books that has stayed with me for a lifetime, that has guided my journey and my passion over those years. I passed on the gift of reading to my 5 children, and they're passing it on to my 8 grandchildren. And that's how it should be, that we never lose sight of the importance of the spoken and written word to us as human beings across every single aspect of our life. It's there, language is there.
And as we always say, it's the gift that keeps on giving. That is the gift that reading brings to us. So are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Ahmed. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Isobel, for the inspiring speech. It's really actually very inspiring to me and for everybody, I guess. Your life story by itself is inspiring, actually.
Thank you.
I'm reading actually here, I'm getting inspired by you. I have a silly question. So nowadays we are living actually in, so we can read using multiple mediums. So is there a difference between reading from a screen or reading from a book? Which one we should encourage our students or our children to read it from?
So that's a great difference. That's an extremely intelligent and great question. Thank you so much for that. The scientific research has shown that when we read on a device, whether it's a Kindle or an iPad or whatever, we absorb the information in a different way. We read much quicker on a device than we do when we read physically in a book. Therefore, the uptake of the memories is shorter. So it's a different experience. I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but the medical advice is that children under the age of 2 should have no access to electronic devices, because their brains are plastic, and it can change quite a lot of their, you know, of how the brain grows. So it's very sad when you see little babies on iPads and phones and things like this. And I think we need to really raise awareness of the dangers of electronic devices for little children. You will see children, they go up to sort of lots of things and they try and swipe them as they would an iPad. So when a child holds a physical book, when a child is sitting on its parent's knee and it's got a book, books have a smell, they have a feel, and you can turn them, so that there are different senses involved in that than there is in a electronic device. So we certainly, the beginning of the journey for children, I think, through primary school should be physical books. I don't think that they should be reading electronic books. I think once they go to secondary school, obviously technology is there and they will go on, but but I think primary school should be absolutely about physical books, and books for children at home should be physical books, books that they can touch, they can chew, they scribble on. Okay, that's part of the learning process. You know, they love pop-up books, but often children want to explore a pop-up book and they tear it, and then they're a little bit sad about that. But that making mistakes is how we learn. And again, that is really important. So I'm all in favor of physical books. I have a Kindle, I will use it. I have electronic devices, I will use them. But for children, I really absolutely believe the power of a physical book is much better.
Just to add on to what Isobel has just mentioned, for those of you who may be interested, I would recommend the book Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World by Mary Ann Wolf. Everything that Isobel was saying can be found actually in that book in terms of how children should first be exposed to physical books before they would even, go digitally. So I think we only have 2 minutes left. Najla, are there questions online? So Najla is our PhD student who has been typing furiously and doing the hosting online. Are there burning questions from our online attendees? Najla, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, hello, Dr. Moira. Everyone has been enjoying this speech so far and has been giving comments, on Her Excellency's speech and her journey with reading. But so far, I haven't, no questions has been typed yet.
Okay, wonderful. So last words, any last questions before we wrap up?
Dr. Moira, I have a question, if I may.
Just for a while, one question. Sure. Yes, please.
Thank you. When I was doing my PhD, we used to have a plethora of time to read for my kids. We would bring every night pile of books, and then their dad would read for them. But when we came to this working culture of the wonderful UAE, which I love it, I found myself tired when it comes to bedtime because I'm constantly working until 8-10 p.m. sometimes. So when it's time for bed story, I have no energy. But I would always encourage my kids to use these platforms, Nahla wa Nahl, my own, to read and encourage them. I would take them to the Salmagrudi or other bookstores to buy a book and read at bedtime. But I noticed something when I started to read for my kids again, sometimes when I don't feel tired, it helps actually strengthen the relation, especially with my son, Muhammad. He's 8. He used to struggle really with anger issues for a number of years. And I think this is because I stopped maybe reading for them. But when I started going back, he immediately the next day he wrote me a letter actually saying, "Thank you for reading me, Mom, every night." And I felt I need really to push myself. I know we are busy, but if you have any advice, I would really appreciate it on that.
I just absolutely love what you have said and your honesty. Thank you so much for sharing that. In today's busy world, we all feel tired. We get to the end of the day, parents are so busy, often both parents are working. It is a struggle, but we have priorities, we have choices. And I would always say, first priority for every parent is children. We have chosen to have children, we owe them that. And so priority has to be them. And you have to find that energy. And not only will your son, as you've just said, Mohammed, benefit from it and feel relaxed, you also will benefit by just the very fact of you lying together with your son, sitting on a couch or reading them bedtime stories. You will relax, you will benefit, and you will be energized by that. So always say, I have a choice. I can choose to stop what I'm doing and read to my child, and you can do that. And in fact, I have been in meetings during lockdown, and my grandchildren were there. A couple of them were sort of toddlers at that time, and they would pull, I always have piles of books everywhere. They'd go and pull a book off and they'd come and sit on my knee and just, basically want me to read to them, I would have to say, I'm really sorry, I'm going to mute myself for a moment. I'm still listening, as it were. I wasn't really. And I'd read them the book, because it broke my heart to say, sorry, I'm too busy, I can't read to you. And, you know, we do have a choice. We all have a choice. And we all have to say, what is our priority? Because you can't turn the clock back. We know that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's now 12:30. It's we've run a little bit over time, but it's been a fascinating conversation with you, Isobel. We're really very honored. We're deeply privileged to welcome you and to have you as our very first keynote speaker for our reading festival with teachers and leaders as lifelong readers. Dr. Mana, anything else to add before we wrap up and turn it over to Zayed and Iman?
No, I just wanted to thank Her Excellency for her generosity and for her time. I know it's very early over there in the UK, but thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us about your journey with reading. It has been very, very inspiring. Thank you very much.
We hope you have tea at least.
Thank you. And thank you all for your wonderful support and sharing and joining hands about what matters to us all, that, you know, the joy of reading, because no one can do things on their own. We all need to join together and make it possible for as many people as possible to know what we know, that there is such joy contained between the covers of books. So I wish you a marvelous festival. I'm so honored to be with you today, and thank everyone who has been here and who's put comments in the chat box. I will read those, and thank you also to the wonderful Najla, who's managed the whole of this session virtually and done such an amazing job. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Isobel.
All right.